Thank you so much, Shahab. I'll just share my screen. If you can just confirm that, you can see my PowerPoint deck, then, I can just start. Let me know if you can see my PowerPoint deck.
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. So, and yeah, Shahab, I just have one more screen, so I don't have access to the chat. So let me know if there's something you feel like I need to answer, though I have some breakpoints. So I might just stop and see if there are any questions related to that particular section. Okay. So let's get it here. Okay, so first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, because I know people might be joining from different parts of the world and from different time zones. So hope everyone is already enjoying this first ever Persian edition of Global Power Platform Bootcamp. So yeah, today I'm here and I'll be speaking about one of my favorite things, which is basically lessons learned from my Power BI journey. So I have been working with Power BI for last few years, and I think it's like with everyone when you work on like different use cases, when you work like with different customers or clients. In that journey of implementing solutions for them, you tend to learn a lot, right? Because it's not like every one of us know everything from starting, right? We learn through that journey. So today in this session, I'm going to share some of the key things. I mean, many of you might already know some of them, but I still want to highlight the importance, like, why these best practices or, why certain processes should be followed, especially while you're developing an enterprise level Power BI solution. So before I start my session, I would really like to thank all the organizers for bringing this event together so that, speakers like us can come and share our, our knowledge on this such a great platform. So thank you so much to all the organizers for bringing this event together. Now, before I start my session, I would like to give a little bit of introduction about myself. So those who don't know me, my name is Pragati Jain. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. I'm also super user at Microsoft Fabric community. So if any of you haven't got chance or doesn't know what Microsoft Fabric community is, I would really recommend everyone to go and join that community. So as I said, I have been using Power BI for like last few years. But I'll be very honest in that most of the Power BI I have learned from Microsoft Fabric community. The reason why I learned most from there is because I am super active on this community in helping different, forum members to answer their questions, what they have regarding Power BI. So go and join that community. Sometimes it's not like that. You are helping others. Sometimes in some ways, those forum members also help you. So you might be answering a question raised by someone, but maybe someone else will come and give a better solution to that question. So definitely go and join that Fabric community. And now it's not just about Power BI, right? It's the whole Fabric platform. So it's not limited to Power BI. So just go and join the community and then just learn from the best there. Then apart from that, I have got nearly 10 plus years of industry experience in the analytics industry. And currently I'm working as analytics manager at Avanade here in London in United Kingdom. Then outside my work, I'm also organizer at Data Weekender conference. Sorry about my throat, guys, since this morning something really came up, but I'll try to cope up. So yeah, this is basically a free virtual data platform conference that some of us organize every year, and it's free of cost. So for this year, we are going to make an announcement soon. So stay tuned on the social platforms about the Data Weekender conference. Then apart from that, I'm also manager at Microsoft Fabric UK user group, where we also, just support and, bring new speakers with new contents. So if any of you guys are interested in speaking at the user group, then definitely reach out to me. And it's not just about the experienced speakers. We also promote new speakers at our user group. So if you're interested in starting your journey, why not reach out to me? Then one fun fact about me is I just like to call myself a techie artist because I do a lot of painting as well, apart from my professional work. So that's how I came up with that fun fact about me. Okay, So that was about something about myself. Now let's look at today's agenda, like what we are going to cover today. Now, as I said, today I'll be covering some of the key learnings that I have learned in the past few years while developing these Power BI solutions for my customers. So today I'll be talking about Power BI in few different sections or a few different areas. So today we'll be focusing on three different areas. One is Power Query, which is definitely the key thing you need to know, because before you start anything in Power BI, you bring your data into Power BI, right? And that's where Power Query plays a very vital role. Then the second section will be data modeling. So once you've got your data, it's time for you to model it, right? So it's not just like you get like a very big, wide, flat table and just start working on it. You can do that, but still there are some recommendations, some best practices, what you should follow, because if in the end you really want your Power BI solution to be performant or more optimized, you really need to create a better data model that can deal all kinds of slicing and dicing on your report, make your report more optimized. Then the third section we'll talk about is visualization. So let's start with the first area. So first we are going to talk about Power Query Editor. Let's go to the next slide. So when it comes to Power Query Editor, okay, this is something I've also done in my early career, okay? When I started working in Power BI, I used to get everything into Power BI, irrespective of there are 10 columns or there are like 200 columns. I've done those mistakes in the past. I used to bring like everything into Power BI. But then slowly I learned there is actually not need to bring like everything. I should only bring what I really need, because if there are 200 columns, and in the end, say I just end up using like 50 columns from my data, then what's the use of keeping those 150 columns in my Power BI file, right? So just bring what you need, because you really don't need those extra columns, and those extra columns are adding somehow in a negative way to the performance of your Power BI report. So the first thing, that's actually the rule of thumb we should follow, is bring only what you need. So very simple example, it might just not, you really don't need to know what those columns are. It's just an example. I couldn't get that flat table in a single screenshot, so I split it into three different ones. So for example, consider this table, which has got like, say, 20 columns or so. But in the end, say I end up using only like, say, 10 of them. So that's why the rule of thumb is we need to make sure we only bring what we need, because suppose if you bring those 200 columns, okay, but you end up using 50 of them, but those 150 columns are still lying in your Power BI file and they're taking a lot of space in the Power BI memory, which will actually hinder your performance on the report. So keep in mind, there's always an option to add new columns in Power BI if you need them later. But if in the starting you think, no, I just need these 20 columns or these 30 columns, make sure you bring only them. And if in future you want to add something else, bring those new columns in later, because you can always do that. Then the second thing, what I really want to, point here is, because I've actually, created very bad reports in the past where I was doing all the transformations in my Power BI file. So the rule of thumb here again is transform upstream as possible. So there is a very famous Roche's maxim of transformation rule, which is actually written by Roche's maxim, Matthew Roche, basically from Microsoft. And what he says is data should be transformed as far upstream as possible and as far downstream as necessary. So you should only transform data as downstream as possible if it is really required. Otherwise, you should handle all your transformations as upstream as possible. So when as upstream as possible means it should be nearest to your data source. So for example, if in Power BI, you're bringing in your data, like say from a SQL Server database, and now say you bring the data in and then you just realize, oh, I need 5 more columns. Obviously, in Power BI, you can create those 5 columns in Power Query Editor, or you can create those 5 columns using DAX on top of your data model. But according to this rule, you should, as part of best practice, create those 5 columns if possible on the SQL Server database side. Because when you do all these transformations in Power BI, it definitely adds a lot to the Power BI engine because you're making that Power BI engine work when you add a calculation or something like a calculated column. So why not take that burden out from your Power BI and add it to the source side? So if you add those kind of calculations on the source side, then Power BI file is actually not doing. Basically, you are taking out effort from your Power BI engine and just making it more optimized and just making it to use its resource where it is really necessary. So make sure you follow this rule. Now, there could be few things here, like, for example, if someone might have a question, like, should I add transformation in DAX or Power Query? Now, when comparing DAX and Power Query, I would straight away say, definitely add your transformations in Power Query. But someone might have another question, like, should I add transformations in Power BI or data warehouse? Again, as per best practice, I would suggest go and add them in your data warehouse or in your database rather than doing that in Power BI. So make sure that, these are really very small things, and these might just not show you impact when you are working with, like, just say a million worth of rows. It will not show that much impact. But when you work with, like, say, billions of rows of data, then these kind of small things can really, help you improve the performance of the report. So better to do these things at an early stage rather than once your product is completely developed and then going back and changing things, because trust me, going back and changing things is not easy. It's always easy to follow these best practices from starting itself. And if you want to read more about this Roche's maximum rule, then I have added a link to Matthew Roche's blog on the slides. And yeah, I'll be sharing these slides with the organizers and they'll be happy to share it with you as well. Then the next thing comes is making sure to choose the right data types. Trust me, one of my reports model was literally optimized by just solving this, by just keeping this thing in mind, because I'll show you one of the use case from the same solution. Obviously the data is not what I worked on, but I kind of faked the data and used it. I'll show you that scenario, why choosing the right data types can really impact. Now, for example, fixed decimal number data type can cause performance issues. We'll see that in a second. The reason, because whenever so there are different data types in Power BI. One of them is fixed decimal number data type. And suppose to a certain column, you give this data type, then by default, what happens is a fixed decimal number data type stores value up to 4 decimal places. Now, in most of the cases, you might literally not need that 4 decimal places precision. You might just be happy with, like, say, 1 decimal or 2 decimal places, right? So it's better to set that kind of precision beforehand in Power BI before you go further down the line and use that column for some calculation or for some reporting in your Power BI report. Let's see an example here, like how this small thing can really impact your data model size. Now, for this, what I did was, this is a public data set of CO2 emissions on which I've actually created a report, and I've shown that report in many of my sessions before. And if any of you guys need the link, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'll be happy to share the link of the report, which is published online for anyone to see. So for example, in this certain report, I had my emissions data. And you can see this emission value, which is just expressed in billion tons, is a fixed decimal number at this stage. So what I did was I gave it a fixed decimal number data type here in my Power Query editor. And then what I did, I went to Tableau editor. Now, Tableau editor. So if you are not familiar with Tableau editor, which is an external tool, which helps you optimize your data model, especially when you're working with large data models in Power BI. If you don't know about it, definitely go and have a read about Tableau Editor, which is a great external tool. And this is the tool I use mostly while working with Power BI. So in Tableau Editor, there is an analyzer called Vertipec Analyzer. And if you run that Vertipec Analyzer on your data model, it kind of gives you statistics around every other column in your tables. Now, for example, this column, emission value billion tons. I have given it a fixed decimal number data type. And once I see that column in my Vertipag analyzer, I can see the size of the column. And the size of the column here is somewhere around 8 million. So you can see, and this is the column size, what I see. Now, let's make a small tweak on this column data type. The next thing what I did is, I again went back to Power Query. And what I did on my emission value billion tons column, which we had as a decimal number before in the previous step, what I did was I just transformed it and rounded it up to only 2 decimal places. And once I do that, I rerun my model in Tabular Editor just to see, does this impact anything on this column in the model? So what I did, I rerun the Tabular Editor, and again, Tabular Editor gave me certain statistics around the columns of this table, and I can see my column size is reduced to this number. And just did a calculation on top of it, and if I see the size of the column is nearly reduced by 53%. Now, this is just an example of one column. Now, in your data set, you can actually have so many columns, right? If you follow these kind of, approaches or best practices, it will actually impact a lot when you see it as a bigger picture on your whole data model. Small thing, but again, it can impact a lot. If one column can impact this much, just imagine if you follow the same thing for other columns where you need to have the same data type, it will again impact your data model in a very positive way. So make sure, this was just an example from one of the use cases I created for a customer. And I tried to do that on a public data set to show it here. So this kind of actually reduced my model size by a lot because I had so it was a finance report and I had so many numbers which were actually fixed decimal type earlier. And it was adding a lot to my data model size because of the column size. And those columns were somewhere around 45. And once I did this, it kind of reduced my whole data model size to a lot smaller size. So small thing, but impacts a lot. Second thing, this is something I have started doing from last few years, using views over tables. Now, obviously, you can say if you're connecting to a database, you always have option to bring in your tables in Power BI, use those tables to create your data model, create calculations on top of it, and then you can create your report and insights and stories, whatever you want to do with that data. But sometimes using views could be a better way to handle things on Power BI side. Now, if you're coming from database background, you know what a view is. View is basically just a result of a query over a database table. And the main thing why views work better than tables from performance point of view is because views generally doesn't store any physical data. When you load a table into Power BI, it actually gets stored as a physical table or physical data within Power BI's memory. But when you bring in views, they're actually not stored as they don't take a physical memory on Power BI side. Then one positive point or one benefit of using views that I would like to highlight here is views are less complex. The reason is, for example, you bring in 3 tables. And now in Power BI, you feel a need of merging or joining those tables into like a single table. So you go into Power Query Editor, create those merges and club those 3 tables into a single table by doing merges on them. But what if you create a view which is already the merged view of these 3 tables or merged calculation on these 3 tables, and you directly access that view in Power BI? Then again, you are actually not putting the burden on Power Query Engine to calculate that merges because you have already created those merges on the database side as a view and you're accessing that view in Power BI. So again, think about it, the kind of data you're working at. Sometimes merges and joins in Power BI can really be complex if your data is very huge. So think about it. If view can be a better option when it comes to performance of your report, or you still want tables. So this is a very important thing you need to think about working on the solution you're trying to build. Then the other thing is views can Now, as views are generally, like the aggregated, query over a table. So it kind of gives you a filtered view of a table's data as well. So in a way, you are again not bringing the whole table into your Power BI. You're just bringing what you need in the form of a view. So again, we saw a principle in the starting, bring only what you need. So views help you solve that thing as well. So if you are doing certain complex calculations, or you're doing complex filtering or group bys or aggregations on tables, you can create that as a view on the database side and just bring it as a view and use it in your Power BI data model. Then the other thing is view can, this is actually one of the important point here. Views can also help you limit, access of certain users on the data. So for example, you have a report where you have a need where you really don't want all your users to have access to your underlying tables in the database. So what you do is you create aggregated views on top of those tables and give them access to only whatever you want them to have access to. So basically, you are not, say, giving them access to underlying table or the base tables. You are just giving them access to the data that they are allowed to use in data model or maybe on reporting in Power BI. So it kind of helps that, it kind of helps you to have that access control on the data as well. So that's why, in the end, I would always say, if you're really working with like a bigger solution and where you think like bringing those multiple tables can add a lot to the performance of Power BI, think about it if views can solve that issue, because I have seen that difference. Views have actually being more performant when compared to bringing the tables and doing all the calculations on the tables. Then the next thing, this is a very important concept, which I was actually ignoring for some time, but then I started really looking at whether query folding happens on the data side or not. Now, what query folding is, I'm actually not going into deep because query folding can actually take like the whole hour. Even the whole hour will be less to explain the concepts of query folding with all the examples, but just give you a small idea about what query folding is. So for example, so when query folding can happen. So query folding, first of all, will only happen when you're trying to bring in data from some database, which actually, follow the SQL query syntaxes. So for example, if you're bringing in data from SQL Server database to Power BI, then query folding should happen. Now, what query folding is, so what query folding means is, it is just about when, your Power Query sends a single statement of query to retrieve and transform source data to your database. So I'll show you an example here, like what that query folding happens or how that happens in Power BI. And when this Power Query, which is your Power Query engine in Power BI, generates this single statement to retrieve data from your database, it means query folds. But if this single statement is not getting generated in Power BI, then query is not folding. We'll see a very simple example of this in coming slides. So first thing you need to understand here is when it comes to query folding, it is only supported by databases that support query languages like MySQL, SQL Server database, etc. But query folding is not supported by if your source of data is like, say, flat files or Excel file or CSV file. So they are only supported by the databases who support query languages. Now, let's see a few things before we go to the example. Now in Power BI, we can actually go and do so many different kinds of transformations, right? You can do merges, appends, joins, you can rename columns, change data types, add index columns, all those things, right? So there are so many transformations we can do in Power Query now, right? So there are certain transformations that have limitations that they will not support query folding, but some of them support query folding. So first we'll see what transformations in Power BI support query folding. So few transformations like removing column, renaming column, filtering rows, grouping and summarizing, expanding your record columns, appending queries that are coming from the same source, or merging queries that are coming from the same source. Or if you're creating some custom columns in Power Query with a very simple logic, then they all support query folding in Power BI. But there are again certain transformations that don't support query folding. So for example, if you're trying to append two queries that are coming from two different sources, for example, it could be a SQL Server database and say a Excel file. Again, merging queries coming from different sources, and then custom columns with complex logic, or adding index columns. So these kind of transformations are yet not supported by query folding. So if you're doing these kind of transformations and still thinking, okay, why query folding is not happening, then this will not happen because they are currently not supported by query folding. But now, first thing, now as we have already seen what query folding is, what transformations are supported and not supported by query folding, let's see a simple example how to identify if query folding is happening in your data. So if you go to your Power Query, and suppose if you bring in, like, say, some table from your database, okay? Now, in this case, I'm connecting to my SQL Server database, bringing a table called channel. Now, all the applied steps in Power Query are shown under this applied step section. And if you right click that step, and under that step, there's an option called View Native Query. If that View Native Query is not grayed out, it means you can select it and something comes up like this, it means query folding is happening. And when you click that View Native Query, and if you see on the right, it looks like a simple SQL query, right? I'm selecting certain columns from my table and then applying certain filters, and then, this query is actually going back to my data source and bringing me the result. So it means Power BI is converting all these applied steps into a simple SQL query, sending it back to my SQL Server database and bringing me the results. So it means my query folding is happening. But there could be scenarios where query folding is not happening. So whenever you bring in data into your Power Query, and if this View Native Query is grayed, it means you can't select it and you can't see anything. It means Power BI is not able to generate that single query statement to send it back to your database to bring in the results. So query folding is not happening. So if it is grayed out, then query folding is not happening yet. But there is a way to enable query folding in Power BI, and this is a very important thing. Now you can enable query folding by adding a parameter called enable folding is equal to true in one of your applied steps. So I'm not going into details. You can find very good videos about it online that people have created, and even Guy in a Cube guys have created a good video around how to enabling true. I mean, how to enable query folding when it's not folding in the data, okay? So for example, just consider an example where query folding is not happening. And what I did was I just added a new step in my applied steps before the step that was not folding and added this statement there. And what it does is when I go to the step which was not folding, it is now folding. So this is like just a way how you can enable query folding, but I have seen scenarios where this was not working for me. Maybe I was not doing it right, but yeah, I literally gave up on it. But yeah, there could be scenarios where you can see this might not work in your scenario. But yeah, there is a way to enable query folding. Now, the main thing, why we need to consider query folding, because there are advantages of query folding. The first thing is when you refresh your data, especially when you're importing your data, when your models are like in import mode, then if query folding is happening, your refresh is going to be more efficient. And if query folding is happening, you are definitely utilizing your Power BI engine in a better way, in an efficient way, because most of the job is done by the data source, right? Because Power Query generates a single query, sends it back to data source, and data source gives you the results and returns it back to Power BI, rather than Power BI engine doing the work. So you are here efficiently using your Power BI engine. And again, if query folding is happening, it will avoid any performance issues in future on your report. Cool. And yeah, if you want to learn more about query folding, definitely you can have so many tutorials or videos online, but I would suggest one 30-day challenge on query folding by Alex Powers. The link is here in the slides, which I'll be sharing with the organizer, so you can go and have a look at it. Okay, the other thing what I really like is, obviously I really like to organize things. So I love how folder organization can help things in Power Query Editor. So for example, a simple example where I've got so many tables going on here. And what I did was all my dimension tables, fact tables, and merge tables and other queries. What I did was I organized them in a folder, and this kind of gives me a better understanding on what these tables are about. So for example, I created a report. After 6 months, I come and see this report. So at least I'll know, okay, what are the dimension tables I have, what fact tables I have, what are the merge tables I created to get to the fact tables, and what were some of the other queries in my data. So organization just helps. You might not consider that as an important step at starting, but trust me, it is an important step. And especially if you're working with data flows in Power BI, organization can really help you in organizing your staging queries, your intermediate queries, your dimension tables, your fact tables. So make sure you do that in the starting because it will just make your life easier in the end. So yeah, one of the tips from my side, I would say. Then in addition, few things to remember when you're working with Power Query is, like for example, you need to rename your steps. So under applied steps, sometimes we don't tend to rename steps like what they're doing, because if you see the default steps in Power Query, they are like change type, rename columns, or added index, something like that. But if you rename them properly, they'll just help you in the future to understand, like, what you have been doing, what kind of merges you are doing, what merges between what tables. So it's good to just, rename them in the Power Query editor. And also there are some few conventions around, like what kind of naming conventions you should follow in the Power Query editor. Then it's good to follow them. Then data type, definitely we saw one of the example why having the right data types in Power Query editor is important. Then and then organizing queries, and there are a few things which can be seen here. Okay. So now the next section, what we'll cover is data modeling, which is again a very important aspect when it comes to Power BI development. So now once we have got data in Power Query, we have got the data, we have transformed it, we have got it into the right shape, okay? But now I really want to create a good data model on top of it so that in future, when I'm creating a report, then it kind of helps me with the right slicing and dicing of data, right? So that's why we create a data model. We just not go with like a very wide and long flat table in most of the cases. There are very rare cases where a wide flat table or long flat table might help you, but not in most of the cases. Because Power BI works better when you have a proper underlying data model. And consider data model as one of the key foundation of how your data will parse in the next step. So when it comes to data model, the first thing I would like to say and mention here is, which is really important, you need to turn off auto date time and auto time intelligence settings in Power BI. The reason why I'm saying this is, if you have auto date time enabled in Power BI, or if you have this auto date time and time intelligence enabled in Power BI, then what happens is, if you run your model in a tabular editor, for every date column in your data, it tends to create a local date table. And when those local date tables are created, they're actually taking space of a table in your data model, which kind of increases your data model size. But once you turn off auto date time, then these local date tables are not shown in tabular editor because you have eliminated those local date tables, which you really don't need, because as part of best practices, we all say that we should have a date table in the data model. And once you have a single date table in the data model, here I've got a calendar table, which is the only date table in my data, and other date columns are are just not taking that space as a local date table. So if you turn off time intelligence, then it just helps you with saving space on your data model, and your data model size is not that big. So make sure you turn off this time intelligence feature in Power BI. And the second thing, I think I just got this naming wrong here. I wanted to say that you need to turn off auto detect new relationships in Power BI as well. The reason for this is, for example, you're working with like say 100 tables in Power BI, and you're loading those 100 tables or views in Power BI. And if this auto detect is new, if it is enabled, then Power BI tends to create relationships on its own. And it kind of creates sometimes inactive relationships, active relationships, which you really don't need on your data model. So turning off this setting, auto detect new relationships, helps you with that challenge as well, because sometimes Power BI can just go crazy and create hundreds of relationships between those 100 tables, which is kind of tough to understand what's really going on that data model side. So if you really want to keep it simple, keep it clear, make sure you turn off this auto detect new relationship setting as well. Then the second thing is, everyone says go for star schema data model. Now, the reason star schema is good because it just works great with Power BI. So you can have so many dimension tables, you can have one fact tables. And while you're working on the report, these dimension tables helps you slice and dice the measures, slice and dice the numeric columns within your fact table in a very good way. It is just a suggested approach, but I've seen data models and worked on data models in past where we have gone with our option of using Snowflake data schema as well. So it completely depends, but as part of best practices, everyone says star schema should be your first approach. But as I said, there could be cases where star schema is not used. Then the next thing, why star schema approach is beneficial. Data is more organized, so you can clearly see you have got one fact table, and you have got all these dimension tables here. Your data is properly, sliced. Basically, star schema model is helping you to slice and filter your data properly. Then a good data model avoids complex DAX. So in the past, I have written very tricky DAX expressions. And then I learned slowly that I can actually solve some of my DAX challenges creating a proper data model. So if you want to avoid complex DAX, make sure you work more on the data model side. Because if your data model is in the right shape, the way you want your data to be sliced and diced on your report, then you can actually avoid writing those complex and tricky DAX. And trust me, writing those complex DAX is not a good thing. And I'm not a DAX expert, so I always try to avoid DAX wherever I can. And then the next thing is that star schema data models are designed to handle large volume of data very efficiently. So if you're working again with trillions of rows, billions of rows, then star schema could be the right approach for you. Because in smaller data, as I said, a single flat file may also work. But in star schema, but when you have bigger data, then star schema should be the way to go. And then obviously, if you go with star schema, it improves performance. And when you're doing data refreshes, they are also efficient. Next thing, think before creating many-to-many relationships. I have seen models where many-to-many relationships have created, but sometimes they really don't work pretty well. So always make sure you solve that many-to-many relationship to one-to-many by bringing a bridge table into the data model, because many-to-many can actually end up giving you wrong results. You can again find a lot of articles about it online, why many-to-many relationships should be avoided, with pretty great examples. So if you really want to learn more about it, go and search online why many-to-many relationships should be avoided in Power BI. Next thing, display folders for measures. So sometimes in a data model, you can end up having so many measures. So display folders just help you organize your measures in a better way. And I really like doing it because I have worked on data models where there have been like thousands of measures and they were like just going crazy in the fact table. So I started using this display folder. It kind of gives me more idea, okay, which measure is coming for what, or which measure I've written for what purpose. So these display folders can just help us with that organization. Then some of the data modeling best practices, again, bring only what you need because you really don't need everything. Then data format of the column should be kept in mind. See if you can follow the star schema approach because it works better in most of the cases with Power BI. Turn off auto date time, then make sure you check your relationships. Your auto detect should not be on. because if that is on, then Power BI creates different relationships, which is really not required on the report. Avoid many-to-many relationship, use bridge tables, clean your data at the data source side, and avoid burden on the Power BI side. And think about calculated columns. Do you really need them? If you don't need, go with measures. Always go with measures until you really need a calculated column. If you need a calculated column, do it on the source side, not in Power BI, because it should not be done from part of the best practice, because creating calculated column can really hinder performance of your data model. Then the last section, what we'll cover is visualization. It will not take us much time. Let's go quickly. Now, there are a few use cases. What I put under visualization is, for example, performance impact by number of visuals. I have seen report where, that there have been like 20 visuals on a single report page. I'm talking about the single tab, single page on a Power BI report. So when you have those kind of number of visuals, it actually adds to the performance of the report, because every visual, whether it is a shape, it is a line, it is a text box, it is card, it is whatever visuals you're using, every visual takes time to load and show you the results. So for example, I've got these three card visuals, and then if I've got a single multi-card visual, and if I run performance analyzer in Power BI, so performance analyzer in Power BI, very important aspect. If you are trying to troubleshoot performance on Power BI reports, performance analyzer is the first step that tells you where the issue with performance lies. Because whenever you run a performance analyzer, it kind of tells you where the performance has gone, whether it is in the DAX you have written, it is in the visuals you have written. So whenever you're trying to troubleshoot performance, start with performance analyzer in Power BI. Now you can clearly see, once I converted these 3 card visuals to a single multi-card, these 3 card visuals were individually taking 71 milliseconds to load. But this one multi-card row is taking 72 milliseconds, which is nearly 1/3 to what these 3 visuals were taking to load. It's a small number, but when you are creating a bigger report, these small numbers add to a lot to your performance. So make sure you choose wisely what visuals you are using to represent information on your report. Second thing, map visual performance. This is something I learned recently, like in last 2 years. So for example, this is a map I've got, which shows population by city. This is the second map where I'm showing population by latitude and longitude. But when I run performance analyzer, the population by city map takes 2,976 milliseconds, but population by latitude and longitude takes only 978 milliseconds. The reason is latitude and longitude are more precise geographical information when compared to city. Because for example, we have London in UK, but I think we have London in Canada as well. For an example, we have New Hampshire in UK, but we also have New Hampshire in United States. So that city name can be confusing on the map. So you may end up getting wrong results as well, and it might just take map visual to take more time to render the right results. So that's why if you can use latitude, longitude, which is more precise, then that helps, because again, it takes less time for the map visual to retrieve the results for you. Third thing, use custom tooltips. So for example, if you've got this table with so many columns, but suppose if I really don't want that table to be more clumsy or with more information, I can just add the main columns and add a custom tooltip with additional columns at, say, country level, because it just helps you, make your visuals less cluttered. So make sure you use custom tooltips. It's a pretty nice feature I use on most of the reports I work with, and clients love it. They just like those kind of things on the report rather than having so many numbers in front of them. Then the next thing is access versus labels. Now, some people might not agree on this, but in my view, it's not good to have both access and labels on the report. So in this case, this is my access and this is my label, right? But as part of best practices, have one of them. Either have your access or have your labels, because there's no point in giving them both things, because they already understand what that point is, what information it's giving. So make sure you have one of them. Then think before choosing pie charts. Again, many people use pie charts. I tend to not use pie charts because it confuses me. So I think if it confuses me, then it will confuse my customer. So there are ways to convert pie charts to different visuals. Yes, you can use donut chart and tree map chart, but still, I don't understand donut chart. I don't understand tree map chart because it still confuses me like pie chart. So there are few ways I go with. Just go with a simple bar chart, or maybe go with a decomposition chart. It gives me a better information. I'm sure there are other ways of representing pie chart in a different way, but yeah, it's up to you what information you are representing. Pie chart can work well in very rare scenarios, but not in every scenario. So think before using pie chart, donut chart, or tree map chart on your report. Next thing, adding summary and key insight or some kind of commentary to your report can really help. It just gives user some kind of understanding on what you're talking about, because just imagine users will be seeing this report for the first time when you present it to them. So these kind of additional insights lay a foundation to them in understanding what's really happening in this report and what you are going to tell them. So add as much commentary or summary on your reports. Then colors, definitely make sure you use standard colors, because standard colors every human brain understands. So positive is green, negative is red, right? So make sure you use standard colors. Use of icons and indicators, very good thing to use on the report. So make sure you do that, because from accessibility point of view, colors might not work, but indicators and icons work. So make sure who your users are and try to design report in that way. Then yeah, don't have so many filters on your report page. Again, they are considered as visuals. Make use of filter pane where you can move all your filters on the right rather than adding them as visual. Make sure a slicer visual is a visual, so you are adding to the performance of the report. Then don't forget performance analyzer. This is the key thing to start troubleshooting your performance on the report, okay? So make sure you understand what performance analyzer is and how that can help you optimize your report. Some of the visualization best practice: less is more, don't clutter your report, look for accessibility friendly colors, think before adding pie charts or donut charts, and make sure to keep your report simple. Not everyone likes waterfall chart or Sankey chart. People just like bar chart or simple table of visuals. Tell your story with the visuals and have less numbers. Okay, and make sure to use right theme colors and use conditional formatting in icons wherever possible, because make sure your users are already key to seeing those numbers on the spreadsheets. So you don't want to give them the same thing in Power BI. Tell them how Power BI is helping them, not giving them and replicating the same thing they are used to. Okay, so I think I finished on time. So yeah, thank you everyone. Happy to answer any questions. And just in the end, if any of you want to connect with me, I have my own blog. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, which is X now, and my YouTube channel, and I'm on Fabric Community. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Pragati. I liked all your best practices that you talked about today. And you know, when I see someone's reports and I check all these small things, it shows that how much they're experts in the field of Power BI. Actually, we have some questions, and let me ask. The first one. If I go a little bit up, yeah, Pudil asked a question about removing the columns in Power BI or removing in the views before connecting to Power BI. I think you answered it, but if you can talk about a little bit more, does it make any difference with either of these options to bring the data, to do the transformation in Power BI or database?
I think again, if you don't need columns if you don't need columns in Power BI, just don't bring them in Power BI. So you can so now in Power BI, you can actually choose columns from the data set, right? You just don't need to import your whole table. So when you import a data, there's an option to choose columns. So just bring in those columns, or if you really think like there are so many columns in the data and you're loading like say those 150 columns in your Power BI as a single data file or data set, what you can do is you can create a view, remove those 100 columns and just bring the 50 columns as a view in Power BI as well. So it kind of works in both ways, but you'll have to test the performance based on the volume of data you're working with. Again, when you're just working with like a 1 or 2 million rows, it won't impact that. But when you're working with billions or trillions of rows, it might impact. So again, both options can work, but it will depend on the volume of data and the kind of or the number of columns you're working with on the data side.
Great. Hossein asked a question. I think it was related to when you described about the star schema model. He asked that isn't better to keep one attribute dimension like region or country in fact table?
So are you talking about the key against them? So for example, when you create a dimension in fact table based approach, your dimension table, say, for example, if you have a region table, it will only have region name and region key. But in the fact table, you'll have a region key, not region name, because that region key will be connecting your dimension and region dimension table with your fact table. So in fact table, you only have keys and your numeric columns. That's what fact table is. But dimension table is where you have a key with the information on that key column, like country value, region value, product name, those kind of things.
Great. And next question. Pudiel asked, I need to format row header using conditional formatting on matrix visual. I was able to do it for value, but not for the fields. Is it possible?
Sorry, what do you mean by fields?
Pudiel, if you can turn on your mic, you can ask your question.
Yeah, this is Bharat. Actually, we both work on the same place. So I thought we joined individually. So my question is, I need to format profit and loss on the Power BI, right? For that, I need to format the whole line, right? So including row header as well as all the fields, right? Let's suppose for total, I need to do that, right? Let's suppose for a variable cost, right? That is accumulated of multiple lines, right? I need to do that, right? I need to do that for multiple lines based on profit and loss statement. For that, I was able to format for the value, but not for the column header. So is it possible to format the whole line?
I'm really not sure because I haven't used it before, but I'm sure there should be a way or tweak around it. Because when you apply conditional formatting, there are ways like you can apply it to values or totals or both. And there are also option to change the underlying colors of your row headers or column headers in the matrix visual, if I remember correctly. So I'm just not sure if there is a conditional formatting option in that in the matrix visual. Not. Yeah, so that could be a limitation in that case. And yeah, if you really think that could be a good addition to matrix visual, I would say go and raise it as an idea to the Fabric Idea Forum and put it as a idea that you really need it. Exactly.
Yeah. For the measure, there is an option to do conditional formatting. There is a limited option though, right? So
for measures you can do. But maybe if for row headers it's not there, you can raise it as an idea. Yeah.
Because we have so many subtotal for the profit and loss, right? We can't just have one total at the end. So we need to format those whole line, right? Line by line.
Yeah.
And it is based on which P&L account you are showing, right? So yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have only 2-3 minutes, and just I will ask another 2 questions. Sahar asked, what is the best approach to recognize the required columns to transfer to Power BI at the first step?
What is the best approach to recognize the required columns to transform to Power BI? Okay, so when it comes to identifying what columns you really need on your Power BI report, I think this is a step before you get your data in Power BI. This is more around a requirement analysis, what your customer really want, what they're really looking for on the data, and what they really want to tell story about. So this is not a Power BI exercise. This is more like a one step before Power BI, where you're actually gathering required information from your customer. So if they're working with finance data, then you need to understand, okay, what all data points you really require on your finance data? Do you really need all those 150 columns, or you are really just keen to see those 20 columns related data on your Power BI? So once you are clear on your requirements, then you can start bringing the data and bringing only the relevant data that's been, identified as your requirement. So I would say this is actually a step before you start working with data in Power BI.
And the last question before closing the presentation. Muslim asks, can we set forecasts and alerts like beep for disease outbreaks or to warn the health system that cases exceeded the threshold?
So you can set alerts definitely in Power BI. I mean, in the earlier days, you used to set alerts on the dashboards, not reports. But now in Fabric, you have got Data Activator, which is the new addition. So go and read about Data Activator, where it can help you set alerts on your Power BI reports. So read about it. So that's a new thing you can go and read as a learning, I would say.
Thank you, everyone.